Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Well, welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast. We are live, at least live recording this episode from our brand new studio in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I can think of no better guest to help us christen this great new space than the guest we're going to introduce in just a moment. But before we do that, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know that we stream on, I believe it's 45 plus different podcast platforms. So you can find us on Google, you can find us on Amazon, you can find us on Spotify, on Apple. In, believe it or not, now 108 countries, is it, Melissa? As I look through our new glass and ask about 106 countries around the globe. So we are an international podcast with, in many cases, an international audience. Today, we are going to take things a little bit closer to home. If you listen regularly, you know that I'm not only a Wisconsinite, I am a proud Milwaukeean. I was born here in the city of Milwaukee. I was raised here. I went to school here. And I raised my own family here, and I've made a living here now for 30 years. And as your host, Matt Kirkner, it's such a pleasure to be able to invite in to our podcast studio today's guest, who's probably done more for economic development, probably done more for regional collaboration in my hometown of Milwaukee and in southeast Wisconsin than anybody else on the planet. And with no further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce to our audience Tim Sheehy. Tim is the president of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. Tim, thanks so much for being here.
Matt, thanks. It's a pleasure, and love the new look of the studios.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you get to be the very first guest. And so as long as Tim Sheehy lives forever and ever, you will always be the very first guest that came into our Tech Ed podcast studio. As we just begin our conversation here today, Tim, as I suggested in the intro, we reach an international audience. Some of them are going to be familiar with the MMAC, some of them maybe less so. So as we get going, just tell our audience a little bit what they should know about your organization.
Yeah, so I'll pick up on your theme a little bit. And what we like to do is think globally and act locally. And so when you look at the organization, we've been around for 162 years. We represent thousands of employers, and a big concentration of those are manufacturers that employ about 300,000 people here in southeastern Wisconsin. But our purpose in life, really put simply, is to make sure that the region is globally competitive, that we have high-value jobs that support a vibrant quality of life for all. And so that's really our mission in life. And so we're working on workforce issues very pertinent to this discussion. We're working on improving the business climate, the livability of the community. We're recruiting companies to the region. So all those kind of roll up under 4 strategies focused around talent, equity, livability, and growth.
Talent, equity, livability, and growth. Who can argue with those goals? And doing it for 162 years, Tim. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I realized that your organization has been around a long time. I didn't realize that it was 162 years that the MMAC has been at regional economic partnerships and building really the workforce of the future, creating economic opportunities for people in and around Milwaukee for a long time. We're going to get into all of that. 162-year-old organization, and you've only been the president for 31 years. So lots of people that preceded you, but I've got to believe in 31 years that you've seen all kinds of trends and changes here in the state of Wisconsin. So talk a little bit about some of the workforce trends that you're seeing in the 31 years. So that would go back to about 1991 or so that you became
Correct.
president of the organization. What have you seen?
Yeah, well, the first thing, just to respond on that, if you're running a 162-year-old organization, your job is not to screw it up.
Right, exactly.
It's been pretty successful. And we've been successful because we focus on the needs of our members, which are employers. And, you know, I think that the most informative, you could say impactful, but I'll say the most informative trend that I've seen over 31 years, and it's true today, and it's a trite saying, but demographics are destiny. Mm-hmm. And so when we look forward from today, and you look at southeastern Wisconsin and really the state of Wisconsin, our workforce age population grows by less than 1% between now and 2040. If you look at the United States, we're a little more blessed when it comes to growth in their workforce population based on a global map. But you look around at Europe, you look at Japan, China, you look at lots of places around the country, and there are fewer people coming into the workforce. There are more people leaving. So these demographics are, it still takes 18 years to make an 18-year-old. Right. So they're difficult to argue against. And so what we have to keep doing is focusing on productivity, upskilling, reskilling, and using technology to make more of what we used to make with lots more people, simply because we don't have them.
And every single one of those things are music to the ears of the folks at the Tech Ed Podcast, obviously, as we're so focused on workforce trends, as we're so focused on what is happening in terms of upskilling. And you're exactly right. This is a situation that is being faced not just here in Milwaukee, not in Wisconsin, and not just in the United States, but around the globe. To your point, the need for additional automation and additional productivity, additional efficiency, so very important, which really changes the nature of the workforce. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that today. Before we get into that, maybe we'll start off on a negative and then morph into a positive question, Tim. Urban Milwaukee and urban communities in general, lots and lots of challenges, right? What are some of the negative trends that you've seen over the course of your 31 years at the MMAC?
Well, one of the negative trends, especially for Milwaukee, because manufacturing is still our fastball. It's a huge part of our economy. But if you go back to 2010, we had about 164,000 manufacturing jobs in the region. Today, we have about 112,000. So we've seen a significant decline. But on a per capita basis, we're number 2 in the country with a percentage of workforce in manufacturing. So while we've seen that decline, the biggest pain point our members have today is finding and filling job openings that they have. So I look at that, and I look at high school graduation. 69% of the students in the city of Milwaukee graduate from high school. 36% enroll in a 2 or 4 year institution, and only 14% have graduated from a 2 or 4 year institution 6 years later. Now, not every job, as you know really well, takes a 2 or 4 year degree, but you certainly want the basics of a high school degree and some training after that. So the poignant challenge is, while manufacturing has declined, we still have lots of manufacturing job openings, and we're not preparing enough of our young people to go into those fields.
And as we'll talk about, much more interesting manufacturing jobs, safer jobs, much more technical, that require a much higher level of expertise, and not necessarily, as you say, expertise that comes from a 4 year degree, an advanced degree, in some cases even a tech diploma or an associate degree, although those are great ways to get into the workforce. We have a lot of students they're going through really refined programs to prepare them for jobs in advanced manufacturing, literally right out of high school. But these are jobs that are way more interesting, I think, than some of the traditional manufacturing jobs. So really a lot of optimism around manufacturing for so many reasons. Tell us about some of the positive trends that you're seeing.
Yeah, the positive trends are just that, at least for Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin, is we're number 2 in the country in the percentage of our workforce that's in manufacturing. And for those who haven't been in a manufacturing plant floor recently, the old adage of dark, dirty, dumb, and dangerous is long gone. I spent a part of the summer just in the new Komatsu facility, and talk about eyes wide open in terms of the size of the equipment and the sophistication, but a line that might have moved apart over a quarter mile or mile in the old plant is now a couple hundred yards in the new plant. Right. And it's an exciting environment. You look at the controls, the robotics, the work that's there, and it's really a vibrant, exciting place to be. You don't have somebody punching a button on a line, and so that to me is the optimism is there. We just need to expose more people. I talked to so many young kids in high school. We have a program called Be the Spark. And it's really designed around one of the young students who said to us, I can't be what I can't see. And so to get them to see those careers and those options is a way to create a spark so that then they put the work in behind that it's going to take to get there. But again, having said that, we've got 112,000 manufacturing jobs. They pay on average almost $74,000 a year compared to $61,000 for the other industries that are here. So they're good paying jobs. There's a future to them. It's the skill set has to change, and I think the appreciation for the kinds of jobs they are has to be better rooted in the young people that are coming up.
And I think that's one of the messages that oftentimes get lost when we think about people going into careers like data science or computer programming or, some of these advanced technology careers. But to your point, $74,000 a year. I mean, and that's the average, right? So that means that we have people that are making, in some cases, significantly more than that. Doesn't require, in most cases, a 4-year degree, or certainly a degree beyond a 4-year degree. Many times right out of high school with some good skills training, some good credentials. We'll talk about that today. Or a tech diploma, an associate degree, an amazing family supporting career opportunity in manufacturing. Doesn't require tremendous amounts of education debt that you have to pay off over time. So that $74,000 in some ways even goes further. I think that's a message that gets lost a lot of times on young people and people of all ages, that these are just incredibly well-paying jobs relative to some of the other ones.
No, it's a great point, and one of the reasons that we're really excited about partnering with Bucyrus Foundation and their grant, and really getting some of these classes into more high schools where kids can see mechatronics, where they can see robotics, where they can do the programming, and then I think companies like Komatsu, like Pindle Global Precision, are really interested in then putting these kids in a position where they can actually see how that work impacts not only their lives, but also what those companies are making.
So we talked about some of the concerns in manufacturing. We talked about some of the challenges for the workforce. We talked about some of the future for the workforce. What's your outlook for manufacturing in Southeast Wisconsin, Tim? Is there reason for optimism in the coming years?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, and it's not just what people call the reshoring or the onshoring of some of the jobs, as we've seen, supply chains stretched here. But it's really hard to build up an expertise in a region. And I always say, people will say, well, geez, I wish Milwaukee was more like Silicon Valley. And I said, yeah, there are elements that I'd like to see, but we're not Silicon Valley. That's not in our DNA. And Al McGuire used to say, you got to leave the dance with the one you brung. And manufacturing is in our DNA. And if you look at, power automation controls, some of the other manufacturing that we have, and there's something called a location quotient. So if you have one job, that means that you're about average with everybody else. Well, some of these fields are like 4-7 times the number of jobs that we have here in Metro Milwaukee, which means we have the skill set here. We have the supply chain, we have the expertise, and we want to continue to build on that. So I still see this as a very, very bright part of Milwaukee's future because we've got it, we know it well, we're known for it, and we can recruit and retain talent around that.
And now you're spending a lot of time sharing that story with employers and with investment bankers, with individuals that are looking to make investments in Southeast Wisconsin. In talking with these employers, when they're thinking about relocating, when they're thinking about expanding, what are some of the factors that really drive those decisions, and have those factors changed a little bit over the last 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, the factors don't change. They may shuffle a little bit, and certainly finding and retaining talent is at the top of the list. But I'll just give you one example because it's really good, and probably most people around the world know it. If you've ever had a gummy bear, they're made by Haribo, and Haribo has been making those in Europe since their founding. And so they were looking, because the U.S. is a big market, they were looking to put the third largest confectionery plant in the United States in the U.S. And they searched all over, and they ended up making a decision to put that plant here in southeastern Wisconsin. And it is a very advanced manufacturing plant. So why did they choose here? They chose here because of the manufacturing heritage, their ability, they felt, to develop talent in the region, the potential supply chain, and then the fact that this is everybody laughs at this one, but it's an extremely safe environment. We don't have hurricanes, we don't have floods, and if you're making a $250 million capital investment, that's important to you. But really it was the synergy they saw in their ability to recruit and retain the talent that they were going to need to run what is now the third largest confectionery plant in the United States. So people think, yeah, it tastes great. I love these little gummy bears, but there's a whole manufacturing process that's really sophisticated that goes behind that.
Yeah, manufacturing, logistics, distribution. Another member of the Tech Ed Podcast Alumni Circle, by the way, Wes Saber, who's the executive vice president of Haribo, joined us. I think it's been probably 2 years ago.
And an MMAC board member.
Yeah, there you go. He's a fantastic guy, isn't he? Just brilliant. And you're fortunate to have him on your board. I'm sure with that, just an incredible global view, but yet understanding how to put that to work right here in the city of Milwaukee. And regionally, by the way, for our listeners who may not be aware, Haribo is in, are they Kenosha County or Racine County?
In Kenosha County.
In Kenosha County. So that's a couple counties south of Milwaukee. And when I mentioned the leadership that Tim has had and the impact that he has had in our region, it's not just in the city of Milwaukee. It is literally metropolitan, and it is literally at a minimum a 7-county regional effort, which I think speaks to not just your vision, but also to the kind of the culture here in Milwaukee of we really want to collaborate on a regional basis and make a difference. In doing that, in drawing investment to this part of the world, Tim, we talk about the unique aspects of the Milwaukee workforce, and having lived here my whole life, but done business certainly across the Midwest and across the United States, there really is something special about the workers here in the Milwaukee area. What would you tell our audience they should know about Milwaukee's workforce?
Yeah, again, I think it's the skill set. And, we just talked about Haribo, and I can think of a much smaller manufacturer, Grand Craft Boats, that moved here from Michigan. And so they make these really nice wooden Chris Craft boats. J-Lo has one. George Clooney has one. But again, it's that manufacturing expertise that attracted a company like that to come here. You look at the growth of Milwaukee Tool. 2011, they had 400 employees. They have 3,500 here today. And it's the engineering talent that goes behind developing those cutting-edge tools, the batteries that make them, the kind of tool that they are. So you can really look across a wide range of discipline. GE just spun off. GE Healthcare now just spun off. So there's a potentially new Fortune 500 company located here making really manufacturing really high-end, sophisticated, healthcare equipment. So you can go through all these different areas, but the commonality and the thread is the engineering talent, the manufacturing talent, the design talent, and the supply chain to produce equipment really across the manufacturing spectrum.
What do people tell you about the work ethic of the people in Milwaukee? Do you hear any trends in that regard?
Yeah, it's a strong, really strong work ethic. People show up, they take pride in their work. And that's something that's been in our DNA for quite some time. So again, if you're making a very sophisticated product like an imaging equipment or a high-end boat or something as, seemingly simple as gummy bears, that's what you want. People that take pride in their work, that come every day, and that can grow with you and develop with you.
Taking pride in your work, coming every day. I know you come to work every day trying to figure out and successfully figuring out how to grow the city of Milwaukee, how to continue to advance us economically. In as much as we are all about sharing best practices here on the Tech Ed podcast, and maybe you don't want to give away any of your secrets in terms of attracting employers, but if we've got people in other parts of the country that are thinking about economic development in maybe an economically depressed area, or thinking about acquiring or attracting manufacturing in a different way, what advice would you have for them?
Take some time and stand outside of your own skin. And what I mean by that is do a really critical SWOT analysis of your own region. Understand your strengths, and more importantly, understand your weaknesses. Don't try to be what you're not, and understand what makes you good, and double down and build on that. And I'll use a baseball analogy. If you're a fastball pitcher and our fastball is manufacturing, it's not that you don't want to develop other pitches, but you certainly don't want to lose your fastball. So I think that's really important, that people take that critical, self-critical look at what makes them good, and then really understand the assets that back that up, and make sure that they stay there. And, as we think about manufacturing today, again, we're always thinking about what's going on in the 2-year institutions, what's going on in the 4-year institutions, what are companies doing to upskill their own workforce, because that's what will keep us vibrant.
I know that one of the things that's really important to you, Tim, is thinking about as we disrupt education for the better and building on what works, and maybe taking some of the things that don't work as well and making changes. You're a huge advocate, of course, for public school and public education, huge advocate for charter schools, huge advocate for private schools. So I want you to kind of juxtapose those different options and think about, when you consider the future of education, how do that whole relationship between public, private, and charter play out in the world of education?
So if you approach it from a business standpoint, and there are lots of different reasons to come at this, as this is not the only one or the most important one, but if you think about it, the most important thing to the private sector is a free market economy. Mm-hmm. And underpinning that is a democracy. And what underpins a democracy? Informed citizenry. So if young kids aren't educated, it not only affects them economically, it affects them socially, but it also affects us civically. So it's really important that we do everything we can as a community to make sure that, as somebody coined really well, kids are messengers we send to a time we will not see. And we want to prepare those messengers really well. So when you talk about education, specifically in the city of Milwaukee, we have 115,000 kids. Many of them have never seen the lakefront, and we're located on the lake. Right. They've never been to the airport. And so we want to make sure that they're getting the best education they can. So public education is critically important. But when we look at public education, I look at the Milwaukee Public Schools as a delivery mechanism. I look at independent charter schools as a delivery mechanism. And I look at private schools where kids can go with a voucher as a delivery mechanism. Sure. And so I don't, in a sense, want to play favorites. I want to take best in class from each of them and help all three of those delivery systems improve. And that's what we're trying to do when we say disrupt. We're really not trying to diminish any of them. We're just trying to take best practices, make sure there are quality schools and that parents have access to them and the kids get the opportunity to be everything they can be. And from that perspective, I think it's really important that the K-12 institutions, the K-16 institutions are almost hand in glove with employers, not in terms of doing what employers say they need to do, just so they understand where those industries are going, where the jobs are going, where the skill sets are going, so they can, as Gretzky used to famously skate to where the puck is going to be. And if we can have that relationship with educators, which is really important, and they can inform us about what's going on in their classrooms, then we're going to be much more competitive as a region.
You've got a great partnership with Microsoft, and it's a partnership with Microsoft Philanthropies, and it's through a program known as TEALS, or Technology, Education, and Literacy in Schools, and it has a focus on creating sustainable computer science programs in education. Really, really important as we expose these young people to more and more career opportunities, more and more technologies. So tell us about TEALS, and how is this initiative benefiting the students in Milwaukee?
Yeah, there's a really direct benefit both to the students and to employers. If you think about it, and you have a high school, and you have kids going through a high school, and they have no computer science programming, not freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, no basics, no AP, they can't be what they can't see, and they're not developing a really important skill. So we partnered with Microsoft and then Chris Abley through the Argosy Foundation, and they have funded a program. And what we do is go out and recruit volunteers from companies who can actually spend time in a classroom or work alongside a teacher until they pick up that skill set, and we introduce those courses. So our goal is to get computer science into 25 high schools that don't have them. I think we're reaching about 900 kids right now and exposing them to that opportunity. And so it's exciting, and that's kind of the goal. And that is just an imperative today if they're going to be able to move forward.
And so much crossover, by the way, between disciplines like computer science, like computer programming, and advanced manufacturing. You look at a lot of the technology in advanced manufacturing, and it's just another way to manifest programming, whether it's using ladder logic on a Rockwell Automation programmable logic controller, whether it's using robot programming and operating software and programming a robot to do something. So many different crossovers between the technology that students are learning, for instance, in TEALS, but great experiences there. And it really sets an example, I think, of how we can think differently about some elements of education. As you think about the future of K-12 education, Tim, and in this era of smart automation, IIoT, smart technology, and so on, what are some of the other changes that you'd like to see K-12 education make?
I think that depending upon where the school is, so in the city of Milwaukee, where kids are grades behind where they need to be, it's a challenge sometimes just to get kids to grade level. In other places in the suburbs where kids are on grade level, the question is, how do we expose them to more? And so we've got to find out a way to do this kind of wherever the school system, the school is, and where the kids are. But I think, we all were kids at one point, and learning comes alive when you're connected to something that you can actually see and get excited about. So bringing these experiences into the classroom, getting the kids out, just as importantly, getting their parents and teachers out are a way that you create that interest in learning because it applies to something. I have 3 kids of my own, and some of them were just great students out of the gate. Others were struggled in school, but once they saw an application, they took off. And so that's what we want to be able to do. And again, expose kids to, selfishly, the fields that are really strong here in Milwaukee.
And it is so important for individuals that need that hands-on exposure. And I forget exactly your words, but when your eyes light up, when you get to experience something firsthand, that was certainly me, and I get to see that every day in our work at the Tech Ed Podcast, our work with education. You and I got to see some great examples of that during a recent trip that we alluded to a little while ago. Just for our audience, that was you, former Tech Ed Podcast Alumni Circle member Bill Berrien, we mentioned, Tech Ed Podcast Alumni Circle member Tim Sullivan, chairman of the Bucyrus Foundation, former chairman of Bucyrus International here in Milwaukee, huge Milwaukee manufacturing company and employer. And then we went and visited First Amatrol, who's led by Paul Perkins, who's been on the podcast, and then we went to Detroit to see Fanuc and Mike Chico, another guest. So anyway, really fun day, I thought, to see some great practices in advanced manufacturing education with all of your experience in economic development, Tim, with all your experience working with manufacturers, trying to understand where the puck is going to be, to your point, and then how do we get there with a workforce. What are some of the observations on things that you saw in Jeffersonville, Indiana at Amatrol and in Rochester Hills, Michigan at Fanuc?
Yeah, so first of all, Matt, thanks so much for organizing the trip and taking us down there. It was an eye-opener for us and just really helped me understand how you can break down the learning journey into bite-sized pieces where students as well as employees can add to the skill sets they have, do it in a very disciplined way, and then kind of walk out with that skill and be better at what they're going to do. And so I was really impressed with the training, the modules, how it comes together, their applications. And it was really easy for me at the end of the trip to visualize how putting a Fanuc robot in a high school classroom and watching kids program it. And then as we saw in Detroit, it's the same robot that they could be programming, lifting up a 3,000-pound car and articulating it around. So it just brought what I think can be a very complex set of understandings into view, so we could see how we could apply it.
And I think that's the experience certainly that you had, and it's the experience that the students have too. When we get a student, a young person in front of, for instance, a Fanuc robot programming it for the first time, they are shocked at how easy it is in terms of once you understand those competencies, they can do it themselves. And it really, to your point, lights up that student, exposes them to a career opportunity that they didn't know that they would have otherwise had, or consider a career opportunity that they would not have otherwise considered, get them excited about careers in advanced manufacturing. So exactly the same result in so many cases. We were getting off the plane and finishing the day. Tim Sullivan said to me, and it was music to my ears, he said, "This day could not have been better." And I'm like, "Oh, perfect." And it was just, and I think that was in both ways, because during our travel and spending time with both you and Tim and Bill, really thinking through what the future of urban education can look like, what are some of the challenges, and then how can we plug some of these solutions in a way that affects and reaches their goal, but is also unique to Milwaukee, unique to our workforce, and unique to our way of life and the future of our economic sector, especially in advanced manufacturing. So what a phenomenal day that was. And it was great to have people thinking about both the private side of education, the public education, and the partnerships with industrial employers, which are so very important in terms of how we push education forward. You've been doing this a long time. You have seen tremendous numbers of public-private partnerships, industrial employers partnering with educational institutions. Are there a couple you'd like to highlight where you think this has worked really well?
Let's just talk about the basic of what makes a partnership effective. So first of all, kind of clear understanding between the company and the educational institution and the students about what are the outcomes, clear understanding about what role each plays, communication back and forth. And then if that experience works, it's almost independent of the school and the company if you have those basics down. And, if it's a company saying, look, what I really want to do is just expose people to what I'm doing, then the school isn't going to feel good because it feels like it's one way. In the reverse, if we're just trying to fill an hour of time and shuttle kids out to a company and then shuttle them back to fill the hour, that doesn't work either. So being explicit and clear up front that there's a benefit to both. How are we going to partner to do this with the ultimate goal of having the student, the teacher, and the employer all learning about what they can do to put a better experience in front of children so they can learn. And again, I think, it's this melding of the experience of learning with the actual doing. And I hate to pick on one of my kids, but I'll do it. My oldest son, really difficult time in school, didn't matter the subject. And now I watch him graduate as the top graduate from the Army Sniper School, which takes a lot of math
right,
and a lot of angles. And I was stunned at his ability to do that when he could apply it.
Exactly. It's all applied. Yeah, I love that. There's so many interesting things that you just said there. One of the things that occurred to me as you were going through that answer, Tim, when you're talking about putting students on a bus, taking them to a manufacturing facility, bringing them back. There's an employer, I won't mention them by name because I don't have their permission to do it, that hosted a group of students, and they used to do this every October for Manufacturing Month, and they would bring students into their manufacturing facility, tell them about the company, tour them through the facility, put them back on the bus, and send them back to school. And somebody said, have we ever really studied what kind of an impact these experiences are having on these young people? And they said we should kind of take a look at it. So they came up with the idea that 6 months after the initial tour of the facility, they went back and they surveyed these kids. And they said, what is one thing that stuck out to you from your visit to XYZ company? And what they found was, not only was it almost impossible for almost every student to say what impressed them about that visit, most of them couldn't even point to remembering that they were there in the first place. And so it really is a full court press. We say 7 times, 7 different ways. Yes, we have to do the tours. We have to have the hands-on skills. We have to have the lectures. We have to have the e-learning. We have to have the interactive experiences. We have to have internships and externships. That is how we get young people, and really people of all ages, excited about the future of advanced manufacturing. I'm optimistic about it. I know you are as well. Are there a couple pieces of advice you would have to an industrial employer and an educator, both as they're thinking about how they go about building a partnership?
Yeah, and I think I touched on this a little bit, but it's, sitting down up front and being direct about what each needs out of the experience, and then mapping that through the eyes of the student, because they're the ones that you want to turn a light bulb on. They're the ones that you want to connect with. They're the ones that you want to remember that experience. They're the ones you want to create that spark with, so that then they go on to that field. Not that everybody's going to go on to program robotics or everybody's going to, use mechatronics, but it's exposing them to ways in which they can take their skill sets and make use of them. And there's an application, because they aren't 10 years behind where the employer is. Your learnings and your equipment and your teachings put them in front of where they're going to be. And so that's critically important too.
That's exactly the way we look at it as well, is how do we expose them to as many different career opportunities as possible. That is the future of education and the future of advanced manufacturing. Speaking of a job that you could have, former Senator Dale Koyenga has a pretty good job. The MMAC just announced that he is the new senior vice president of the organization, incredible leader, and I can't think of anybody better to have in a position like that. As I was reading about the article, first it went through the announcement, and then it went through a little bit about Dale's background, and then it went through a little bit about the MMAC, and then like in the third or fourth paragraph, it's like, Tim Sheehy is nearing retirement age, I think was the quote, which brings up a question. Obviously, you're bringing strong leadership into the very senior levels of MMAC. I don't know if you're nearing retirement age or not. You seem like a pretty young guy to me, but what does the future hold for Tim Sheehy?
Yeah, well, I guess as I put it, I'm not going to hang up my cleats. I'm changing jerseys. And so after leading an organization for 30 years, one thing I know, because it happened when I transitioned from my predecessor, is you want a really good, strong handoff. You want the time to make it. Transitions are important in any kind of leadership of an organization. And so this is a very thoughtful, planned out transition. It's certainly not the end of my career, but it's the beginning of Dale's in terms of leading this organization. And so, we plan for that to happen at some point in 24. And then I'll take my skill set and become a free agent, hopefully, and apply it somewhere else with all that I've learned over the 30 years.
Well, there will always be a job here for you at the Tech Ed Podcast, actually, by the way. So as you transition out of the MMAC into whatever comes next, and obviously, again, another great sports analogy, not hanging up the cleats, just changing jerseys, and obviously the organization, but between the two of you is in great hands, and whatever that transition looks like, we certainly wish Dale all the best, and you as well as you work through the transition, and we'll put Dale on the list of potential guests here for the Tech Ed Podcast as well, because we'd love to have him. But we've loved having you you, Tim. Just a great leader, a great friend of the podcast, a huge friend to everyone in Milwaukee, a great friend of mine. Really appreciate you coming on with us today. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you liked this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.